The Tiger. A name that struck fear into any tank crew facing it. A war beast built to dominate, crowned with sloped armor, firing an 88mm shell that punctured nightmares. But even kings fall, and for the Tiger, its downfall often came from within. The most lethal weapon is useless when its engine seizes. This is the story of mechanical betrayal, how the Tiger tank, for all its grandeur, could be felled by failure, and how such breakdowns could decide battles. German command in 1942 believed they had built the perfect tank, a fortress on tracks that could steam through enemy lines and emerge victorious. The Tiger I had frontal armor thick enough to laugh at most Allied guns. Its gun had range and punch, but the price of that power was weight, enormous weight. Every ton demanded strength, strain, precision. The Tiger's haft pushed its transmissions and final drives to breaking point. Its design included the famous interleaved road wheels, a marvel in engineering for smooth movement on trails. But in mud, snow, or frozen ground, those wheels became traps. Slush, ice, or crud stuck between wheels, jammed the system, and immobilized the tank before it could fire a shot. In early Eastern Front deployments, some Tigers bogged down long before they reached engagement zones. In one notorious sortie of the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion, several Tigers arrived with transmission failures, engine seizures, or jammed running gear. One report notes that 3 out of 4 Tigers deployed in a mission had to be rescued, disabled, or destroyed to prevent capture. They never fired a gun. That moment tore illusions about invincible machines. Behind every battle row was a mechanic cursing metal and torque.
A tank is only as strong as its internals and support. The Tiger's failures were not random, they were systemic. Weight strained drivetrains. Complexity punished simplicity. Wartime production rushed unchecked. Maintenance fell short. Logistics buckled under load. Imagine a battlefield where your flagship tank simply won't move. The engine roils, gears grind, final drives moan. Crews pop hatches, stepping onto frozen metal to inspect broken axles or cracked housings. They own maps showing positions, but they cannot move. Their steel predator becomes an immobile target. The significance of these breakdowns cannot be overstated. A moving line needs momentum. Tanks must spearhead, exploit brakes, shield infantry. But if your spearhead collapses under its own weight, the entire charge stagnates, and the enemy retaliates. In Kursk, Normandy, and countless other clashes, Tigers scheduled to punch gaps in enemy lines were sidelined by failure before they could even aim. Over 1,300 Tiger I tanks were built between 1942 and 1944, yet many never saw full combat service because they were broken before or soon after arrival. Non-combat losses, mechanical defects, abandonment due to lack of fuel, or impossibility of repair claimed a horrifying percentage of them. Some sources say that more Tigers were lost to mechanical failure than to enemy fire in certain campaigns. Crews roamed this battlefield of broken steel. A tank that died in silence was worse than one destroyed by shells. At least with a shell, you know what struck you. A crew stripped of mobility faced cold nights, enemy scouts, and the slow drumming of despair. Mechanics, half under shade tarps or oil-stained overalls, worked by flashlight, jacking hulls, replacing final drives, all while under threat. Germany tried to respond. They issued improved final drives, reinforced parts, updated maintenance doctrine, retrained crews, but these were patches on a fundamental engineering trade-off. The later Tiger II, bulkier, more powerful, inherited many of the same flaws, magnified. Its heavier weight further strained designs, making breakdowns even more catastrophic.
The myth of the Tiger as an invincible war beast persists, but the mechanic's notebook, list of broken bearings, sheared axles, seized gearboxes, reveals a different story. Power is only impressive on the road. If mobility fails, power is meaningless. Breakdowns changed plans, offensive thrusts stalled, retreats became dangerous, resources diverted for recovery instead of combat.
The heavy tank that was supposed to win battles sometimes lost them by mere incapacity. By the spring of 1943, Tiger units across the Eastern Front had already gained a reputation for both terror and fragility. Soviet troops would whisper warnings through the snow, "Tiger, Tiger." Yet German crews knew the crueler truth. For every Tiger that reached the battlefield roaring, another one was sitting cold behind the lines with its gearbox scattered across the mud. Each Tiger tank was powered by a 700-horsepower Maybach HL-230 P45 engine, an engineering marvel on paper, but one never meant to drag 60 tons of steel across frozen wastelands. Its carburetors fouled easily. Its oil would thicken like tar in Russian winters. When temperatures dropped below -20 degrees Celsius, starting the engine sometimes required entire platoons to light fires beneath the hull just to warm the block. Mechanics would pour boiling water into radiators, hoping the metal wouldn't crack from thermal shock. The cold punished everything. When one tank broke, the others slowed. Recovery vehicles struggled to tow such weight. A disabled Tiger often had to be destroyed by its own crew to prevent capture. Flames licking from the hatches became a familiar sight, not from enemy shells, but from German grenades thrown inside to keep technology secret. The greatest irony of the Tiger's legend was that it was rarely defeated by direct fire. Allied tankers respected its power, but they also learned patience. They waited for the moment when German mechanics could not keep up, when the Tiger's mobility surrendered to terrain. In those moments, even the most heroic crew became stranded passengers inside a 60-ton coffin. One striking example occurred near Leningrad in January 1943. The 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion, the first to deploy Tigers, had just received its initial 4 tanks. As they rumbled towards Soviet positions, 2 Tigers bogged down in deep mud before firing a shot. Another's transmission failed after only a few hundred meters. Only one reached firing position, and even that one threw a track when trying to reverse. Soviet artillery pounded the area, and by nightfall, all 4 Tigers were immobilized. German engineers spent days recovering them, a costly lesson that no amount of armor could protect against flawed mechanics.
As production expanded through 1943, these flaws echoed across the front. Spare parts were scarce. Each Tiger required nearly 3 times the maintenance hours of a Panzer IV. Its complex interleaved wheels, meant to distribute weight, often froze solid with mud. Soldiers carried hammers to knock ice from between them before movement. Maintenance crews spent more time nursing machines than fighting battles. Yet the myth of invincibility had already spread through German propaganda reels, showing Tigers crushing enemy lines. The truth, buried beneath official reports, was that for every glorious victory film, there were 10 breakdowns never mentioned. Inside the crew compartment, the Tiger was both heaven and hell. The 5-man crew, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator, lived inside a space that smelled of oil, exhaust, and sweat. When the engine ran, the floor plates trembled like a heart under strain. The driver felt every shudder of the gearbox. When a final drive started to fail, he could sense it through the pedals, a sharp vibration, a metallic screech. He knew what it meant, the beginning of the end. A single bearing failure could cripple the entire drivetrain, and replacing it required days, special tools, and spare parts, often hundreds of miles away. In the West, by 1944, these same mechanical demons haunted the Normandy campaign. During the early counterattacks near Villers-Bocage, German ace Michael Wittmann commanded Tigers with devastating effect, destroying British armor columns in minutes. Yet even Wittmann's company fought a constant battle not just against enemy guns, but against their own machinery. Several tanks in his unit failed to even start that morning due to transmission issues. Others ran short on fuel. The Tiger guzzled nearly 500 liters for just 100 kilometers. Germany's dwindling fuel reserves meant that sometimes Tigers were abandoned simply because there wasn't enough gasoline to move them. Fuel, the lifeblood of mechanized war, became their silent killer. In retreat, when orders came to withdraw, some Tigers had to be blown up on the roadside. Crews wept, placing explosives under the engine decks of the machines they loved. These were not just vehicles, they were symbols of German engineering pride. Yet, one by one, they burned under their own flames. Historians often point to one iconic failure that changed the tide in Normandy. During Operation Goodwood in July 1944, several Tigers were deployed to counter the British advance east of Caen. As they maneuvered to firing positions, two broke down in quick succession due to gearbox malfunctions. Their absence created a gap in the defensive line that allowed Allied armor to exploit and push deeper. A single mechanical fault had a domino effect on the battlefield.
By late 1944, the Tiger II, the so-called King Tiger, entered service. Larger, heavier, and theoretically superior, it also carried the same curse. Its 69-ton mass broke bridges, tore up roads, and punished engines. Crews called it a steel castle with clay feet. Its armor could shrug off most Allied shells, but if it broke down, which it often did, Allied aircraft or artillery would simply destroy it where it stood. The sight of abandoned King Tigers, massive and lifeless, became common across Europe's roads in 1945. The Battle of the Bulge further exposed the paradox. German armored spearheads relied on surprise and mobility, but fuel shortages and mechanical attrition crippled them. Columns of King Tigers lined the frozen Ardennes roads. Engines dead, tracks snapped. American engineers joked that the best anti-tank weapon wasn't a shell, it was the German gearbox itself. In diaries recovered after the war, Tiger mechanics wrote of exhaustion and despair. One wrote, "We are not fighting the enemy, we are fighting the tank." Another confessed, "Each morning we pray the machine will start. When it does, we thank God. When it doesn't, we curse him." Their fatigue mirrored the slow collapse of the Reich's industrial might. As resources dwindled, replacement parts became improvised, low-grade steel, recycled bearings, worn components. The mighty Tiger became weaker with every factory run. Yet even in its decline, the Tiger remained a psychological weapon. Allied soldiers feared it more than they should have. A single Tiger, even stationary, could halt entire advances because commanders hesitated to engage it directly. Stories spread of invincible armor, of 88mm shells piercing anything in sight. What those soldiers rarely knew was that inside, the Tiger crew might be struggling to even keep the engine running. The German command structure felt the weight of those failures. As the war dragged on into 1944, High Command began to realize that Tigers were no longer pristine tools of battlefield awe, but enormous liabilities. Pitiful if stranded, dangerous if immobile. They required massive maintenance crews, fuel convoys, and road networks robust enough to carry their weight. The strain of keeping Tigers rolling across blasted terrain placed demands even on Germany's finest logistic minds. One Allied intelligence report from mid-1944 noted German unit erosion. The number of Tigers listed as operational dropped dramatically after every major rainy season or harsh winter. Roads turned to mud, bridle paths cracked under weight, bridging points collapsed under overburden. In the Vosges, in the Italian Alps, in the Russian south, wherever terrain was uneven or weather harsh, Tigers were frequently abandoned or disabled. In the Vosges, one King Tiger slipped sideways off a collapsed wooden bridge. The embankment cracked under its mass, tipping the tank against its side. The crew had to evacuate, destroy sensitive equipment, and leave the steel beast frozen in place.
These weren't isolated stories. In Germany's official logs, maintenance requests for Tigers often outnumbered combat deployment orders. Every repair workshop was jammed, spare parts catalogs emptied, skilled labor overworked, replacement components delayed by Allied bombing of German automotive and armor factories. The factories themselves, once brimming with precision workers, suffered air raids, extortion of resources to other war projects, and raw material shortages. The quality control which had underpinned early Tiger build quality gave way to expediency. Weld seams cracked, adhesives weakened, metal treatments grew inconsistent. The psychological toll on crews cannot be overstated. One war diary entry from a Tiger crew in Normandy said they woke to howling winds, frost inside the turret, tracks buried in frozen mud. The commander ordered a warm-up, the engine stuttered, came alive for seconds, then shuddered into silence. With enemy artillery nearby, they had no choice but to abandon it. Later letters home spoke more of shattered pride than broken gears. The soldier wrote, "We felt naked, stripped of our beast, standing amongst smaller, more nimble tanks that moved and fired while we stood mute." On more than one occasion, Tiger crews were forced to destroy their own machines, not by enemy hits but by mechanical collapse. Fuel leakage, oil fire risks, or total drivetrain failure meant salvage was impossible. The knowledge that a machine you trusted would betray you in silence was a heavy load on morale. With recovery units stretched thin, often risking enemy fire, many Tigers were simply blown up, their crews walking away through cold, scarred fields. King Tigers, designed to be the pinnacle of German armored engineering, revealed the bitter ratio of grandeur to practicality. Their thick armor and monstrous cannons came at a price. They consumed fuel at alarming rates, their engines strained something terrible in traversing soft soils, their tracks snapped or anchors ripped through roadways unfit for such mass. The extra armor sometimes protected them, but only when they could move. When King Tigers were isolated, their armor made them slower to react, slower to turn, and more likely to be flanked or destroyed by air attack. During the Ardennes offensive, when German forces mounted a surprise attack, several King Tigers were deployed to break through points. The plan hinged on shock and mobility, but winter rains and frozen roads stripped that advantage. One King Tiger, loaded with extra armor plates for added defense, broke down before reaching the front line. A repair tractor could not tow it. The crew abandoned it and set charges under its hull to deny its capture. That loss forced a delay in the attack, giving Allied forces time to mobilize defenses. It was not direct combat that stopped the assault. It was a machine that failed to arrive.
In technical workshops behind the front, German engineers tried retrofits. Better cooling systems, stronger welds, simplified suspension parts. Some parts were redesigned to reduce weight, others made more modular so replacement could happen faster. But retraining the mechanics and having spare parts in the right place was always behind schedule. Germany's industrial base was under constant pressure. Allied bombing interrupted supply lines. Civilian labor shortages meant workshops ran with less skilled hands. The faster the command demanded Tigers in combat, the more wear and tear increased, making breakdowns more frequent. Meanwhile, the Allies observed. They learned to hunt Tigers not only with firepower, but with maneuver and logistics pressure. They bombed roads, destroyed bridges, attacked fuel depots, and targeted recovery units. In the race of attrition, they forced German heavy tank units to rely on fixed positions where mobility was limited. A Tiger that sat still could be outflanked. A Tiger which could not move on orders was useless in battle plans. One battle in late 1944 exposed this perfectly. As Allied forces advanced across the Eartgen forest, German heavy tanks, including a few King Tigers, were deployed to defend narrow road approaches. But the forest terrain, muddy and steep, slowed their movement. One of the King Tiger's final drives failed under the strain of upslope climbing. Another twisted its track link on a fallen trunk, something minor but critical. They could not reposition and to hold down positions as planned. Allied artillery laid down suppressive fire. The German defense crumbled in sectors because their heavy machines could not respond or relocate swiftly. And so the machine failure decided not just a skirmish, but parts of campaigns. The reputation of the Tiger and both German propaganda and Allied fear never fully recovered, because those periods of failure were not secret. Soldiers shared tales around mess halls and in letters. German officers muttered about weight and fuel and mechanical horror. Allied commanders bragged about forcing Tigers into breakdown by simply waiting them out, attacking supply lines, and striking recovery units. Intelligence reports noted the German maintenance tail for heavy tanks grew exponentially as the war dragged on. By early 1945, the Tiger had become a paradox, the most feared and yet the most fragile symbol of German power. It was a weapon of psychological intimidation, but within the German ranks, that fear turned inward. Tank commanders began to question not their courage, but their machine. They knew that every time the engine roared to life, it was gambling with fate. Would it surge forward like a god of war, or choke halfway across a field? Every mission was a test of luck as much as engineering. The field maintenance officers kept journals filled with pleas to superiors, desperate requests for spare Maybach HL230 engines, gearboxes, or even the simplest replacement bearings. They begged for fuel shipments that never came, for recovery trucks that were already destroyed, for rail lines that no longer existed. The chain of supply was crumbling, and even the most elite tank could not outrun starvation. In war, mobility was survival, and for the Tiger, immobility was a slow death.
In many regions, the once proud Tiger units became static bunkers. Commanders parked them on strategic hillsides or crossroads, dug in the tracks, and turned them into immovable artillery pieces. A Tiger used this way could dominate a stretch of road until the fuel ran out or an Allied airstrike found it. The Luftwaffe was no longer able to protect them, and the skies were thick with P-47 Thunderbolts and Typhoons, hunting for the glint of German armor. From above, the Tiger's great roofs made perfect targets. A single rocket could destroy what took months to build. For the men who served inside these steel beasts, the breakdowns were not just mechanical, they were emotional fractures. The Tiger crews were some of the most elite in the Wehrmacht. They had endured specialized training, rigorous testing, and endless propaganda telling them they commanded the most powerful tanks ever created. But as the war twisted against them, that faith began to corrode. The machine that was supposed to protect them instead became their trap. A broken transmission could turn a fighting crew into helpless prisoners in less than an hour. Letters recovered from retreating units in 1945 capture that despair. One gunner wrote, "We sat 3 days beside the tank. No fuel, no orders. We could hear the Americans in the valley. It was not courage we lacked, it was motion." Another crew described how they stripped their Tiger for usable parts, burying the machine's gun barrel in mud before fleeing on foot. They left behind what had once been the symbol of Nazi invincibility, now just a hulk of wasted steel in a frozen field. Across the Western Front, Allied troops often stumbled upon these abandoned giants. Many were astonished. Some had faced Tigers in battle and knew their terror. Others couldn't believe that such fearsome machines had fallen not to shells, but to broken gears. Soldiers took photographs standing atop destroyed or deserted Tigers, smiling, resting rifles on their armor. Those images later filled Allied newspapers as symbols of triumph, the mechanical monster slain not by battle, but by time and fatigue. The post-war analysis revealed just how costly that fatigue had been. For every Tiger that reached combat readiness, at least one other sat in repair. Factory engineers estimated that the average operational lifespan of a Tiger on the front was less than 500 kilometers before major mechanical failure occurred. Fuel efficiency was abysmal, roughly 1 kilometer per liter in rough terrain. Every movement, every maneuver, every repositioning came at the cost of precious fuel and further strain on the overburdened drivetrain. And with Germany's fuel reserves evaporating under Allied bombing, each liter burned was a nail in its own coffin.
Historians later debated whether the Tiger was a technological marvel or a strategic blunder. It was unmatched in armor and firepower. Its 88mm gun could destroy any Allied tank before they even came into range. But what good was perfect lethality if it couldn't reach the fight? Its very design, that thick armor, the monstrous engine, the complex transmission, made it the embodiment of Germany's wartime delusion, believing perfection could substitute for practicality. One German engineer, interviewed after the war, said quietly, "We built a cathedral when we needed a cottage." That one sentence summarized the entire failure. The Tiger's glory lay in what it represented, not what it achieved. Its victories on the battlefield were spectacular but rare. Its losses, slow and quiet, came from mud, rust, and neglect. When the war ended, hundreds of Tigers remained scattered across Europe, on fields, in forests, submerged in rivers, half buried in snow or sand. The Allies towed some away for study, others were scrapped for metal. Farmers plowed around them for decades. Children in France and Poland grew up hearing that somewhere in the woods near their village, a German giant still slept beneath the earth. Yet, even in failure, the tiger achieved a strange immortality. Soldiers from both sides remembered it as a creature of myth. Its presence haunted Allied tank crews long after the real machines had vanished. Movies, books, and documentaries would revive it again and again, not as a victorious weapon, but as a symbol of the dangers of arrogance in design. Engineers studied it for decades, noting how every strength came paired with a fatal weakness. The story of the Tiger that broke down, that single machine whose engine failure shifted an entire battle, was not just about metal and oil. It was about the fragility of confidence in war. When that Tiger stopped moving, it forced a change in plans, altered the fate of hundreds, and reminded the world that even the mightiest engines can falter at the smallest flaw. In the last weeks of the war, as Germany collapsed, a handful of Tiger crews still fought on. They repaired their tanks with scavenged parts, cannibalizing destroyed machines for survival. Some lasted days, others hours. They moved through smoke-filled ruins, firing shells into advancing columns until engines seized or turrets jammed for good. When those final machines fell silent, the legend was complete. In one account from April 1945, near the town of Amstetten, a single Tiger held its ground against an advancing Soviet column for over an hour. It destroyed 12 enemy vehicles before its own gearbox seized from overheating. The crew refused to abandon it. They fought until their ammunition ran out, then set explosives inside the hull. Witnesses described the explosion lighting up the dawn, a final defiance from a machine built to inspire awe and ending as fire and ruin.
After the war, Allied officers and historians studied that very site. They concluded that had the Tiger remained operational for just one more hour, it could have delayed the Soviet advance long enough for German reinforcements to regroup. But fate and a broken gear decided otherwise. The Tiger tank's legacy endures, not because it won wars, but because it defined what wars could lose. When perfection replaced practicality, when technology outgrew logistics, and when fear itself became a weapon. The Tiger did not die in battle, it rusted in silence, outlived by its myth. In the years following the war, the remnants of the Tiger were scattered like ghostly bones across Europe. Rusting hulks were pulled from swamps in Poland, shattered shells sat in hedgerows in France, and burnt-out racks lingered along old forest tracks in Russia. Farmers found them buried beneath layers of soil and grass, their immense tracks still locked in mud as if waiting for orders that would never come. For decades, the Tiger existed more as myth than memory. To some, it symbolized the terrifying reach of German engineering. To others, it represented the limits of obsession, the moment when ambition outpaced reason. When Allied engineers inspected the surviving tanks, they were stunned not only by the precision of the design, but also by the sheer waste of effort. Every weld, every bolt, every hinge had been meticulously crafted, yet the result was a machine that choked on its own perfection. In museums today, these restored Tigers sit behind ropes and glass, surrounded by whispers of awe. Tourists lean close to their heavy armor plates, tracing the dents left by enemy shells. Children pose for pictures beside the giant gun barrels, unaware that these machines once decided the fate of thousands. The smell of oil still lingers faintly inside, preserved like the ghost of its former power. Guides speak softly, their voices echoing inside the hollow turrets, telling visitors how a single gear failure once changed the course of an entire battle. One of the most famous recoveries happened in the 1980s, when a team of Polish historians discovered a Tiger buried deep in a marsh near the village of Berich. It had been sitting there since 1944, half submerged in mud, its armor almost perfectly preserved by the cold water. When they finally pulled it out, villagers gathered to watch, some in silence, others with tears. For them, it was not just a relic of German might, but a reminder of what their land had endured. That tank, once feared, now stood powerless, reclaimed by history itself.
Modern engineers who restored it noted something extraordinary. Despite decades underwater, the inner mechanics were still remarkably intact. Every cog and gear still fit together like clockwork.
Yet the same design flaws remained visible: the cramped crew space, the overloaded transmission, the impossible weight. It was as if time had frozen the Tiger in the moment of its own downfall, preserving both genius and failure side by side. In the decades that followed, tank designers around the world would study the Tiger's remains not to copy it, but to avoid its mistakes. The lessons were clear. Mobility mattered more than armor thickness, efficiency mattered more than intimidation, and a war is won not by individual machines, but by the supply chains that feed them. The Tiger's breakdowns became a case study in military academies, symbolizing the moment when engineering brilliance crossed the line into self-destruction. But the human story behind those breakdowns mattered just as much. The crews who manned these machines were not symbols of ideology. They were young men caught in the machinery of war. They fought not for conquest, but for survival. Inside the claustrophobic walls of the Tiger, they shared jokes, arguments, fears, and memories of home. When the engines roared, it drowned out everything: their thoughts, their doubts, their humanity. When it broke down, silence returned. And in that silence, many of them met their end. There is a haunting image taken by a war correspondent near the end of the war. A Tiger tank, its tracks shattered, sitting half sunken in snow. The hatch is open, smoke still rising from inside. Around it, scattered helmets and rifles lie frozen in the frost. The caption reads only, "The machine stopped before the men did." That single line captured the essence of the Tiger's fate. Unstoppable in legend, but stopped by the simplest flaw. Even today, when historians discuss the turning points of the Second World War, they often point not to battles won or lost, but to moments when machines failed, when weather shifted, or when a single decision changed everything. The Tiger that broke down in the middle of a critical retreat wasn't just a vehicle failure. It was a metaphor for the collapse of a war machine that believed itself infallible. When that tank stopped, it symbolized the beginning of the end. And yet the fascination endures. Model builders recreate it in perfect scale, gamers drive it across digital fields, filmmakers use it to capture the cold terror of mechanized warfare. The Tiger has outlived every general, every battlefield, every ideology that created it. It survives as a story, one that warns, teaches, and mesmerizes. Its roar has become history's echo. Today, only a handful of real Tiger tanks remain operational. One of them, painstakingly restored at the Bovington Tank Museum in England, still rumbles to life during exhibitions. When its engine starts, visitors fall silent. The deep growl reverberates through the ground, vibrating in the chest, reminding everyone that this was once the sound of fear. But now it's only a memory, a mechanical heartbeat from another time. When the demonstration ends and the engine shuts off, the silence feels almost sacred. The great beast has gone back to sleep. People clap, take photos, and walk away, leaving behind a relic that once decided the fate of battles through both power and failure. And maybe that's the truest legacy of the Tiger tank, not as a symbol of victory or defeat, but as a lesson in balance, that even the most advanced creation can collapse under its own perfection, that power without reliability is an illusion, that in war, as in life, sometimes the smallest failure can rewrite the largest story. The Tiger tank broke down, but its legend never did. It remains frozen in history, a monument not to triumph, but to the fine line between brilliance and disaster. A reminder that sometimes the mightiest engines of war are undone not by the enemy, but by themselves.